I've got Malik waiting in the room now, so I'm going to bring him in. And I think, who's going to be interviewing Malik? Markus, was it yourself, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Salam, Malik, how are you?
Alhamdulillah, I'm doing fine. How about you?
Alhamdulillah, I'm good. Good. Thank you for joining us. It's a very, very white background. Are you in a lab or something?
No, I'm sitting on my bed actually.
Okay, right. I'm gonna give it over to Markus to have a chat with you. Welcome on the show. Appreciate you being here. And I think we managed to get 10 minutes back, so we're sort of slightly getting back on schedule. We're only 15 minutes late at the moment. I'm just going to look at the questions. Yeah, some interesting questions really. I'm gonna hand it over to Markus, and he's going to ask you about Al-Hashmi, the distillery plans. I try to keep away from that discussion earlier with Kike because I wanted to leave that stuff for you. So enjoy your time. I think it's 17, 18 people watching us at the moment, so we've got a pretty full house. Oh, Ahmed's Ahmed just we've got a chat here, you see, and Ahmed just looking good. I'm watching you, so behave.
Oh, can you guys hear me actually? Testing 1, 2, 3.
Right, okay.
So you can hear me, yeah?
I can hear you fine, yeah.
Assalamu alaikum, my brother.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you, brother Markus?
Alhamdulillah. How are you?
I'm doing fine, alhamdulillah. It's a pleasure being here.
I can see that by your attire, we're streaming into Saudi Arabia, is that right?
Yes, that is correct. We're actually streaming in our distillation facility, which is also my bedroom.
Your bedroom and your... All right, well, I'm tempted for you to show us around, but we'll leave that, I reckon. So
I can show you around, no problem.
Brother Malik, we're talking to Al-Hashimi, and Al-Hashimi is a company.
Yes, that is correct.
Tell me who's behind the company. What's brought the company about, and how did you get into the oud market?
It's actually quite funny. You know, I've always been into fragrances and into oud as well. You know, ever since a young age, being a Gulf Arab, we heavily consume oud on a daily basis, primarily in the form of oils and incenses. You know, then came the whole Western fad of the sprays and the perfumes and stuff like that. But you know, I still always knew oud oil and always used it. I just never built an interest to it in the way that you drink milk, but you don't farm cows. You know.
Okay.
It was kind of like that.
And Nadim, I'm sorry, carry on.
Yes?
I beg your pardon.
You know, Nadim made the Oudict forum, and I actually met Ahmed on there, who was one of our co-founders at Al-Hashmi.
Right.
And me and Ahmed started a side project called Alkhadra Oud, which was a small shop on Etsy around, I'd say, 3.5 years ago or so. And it picked up quite quickly. It was very successful. After that, we merged with Nadim into Al-Hashmi, you know, and it was very quickly where we picked up and, you know, started our own in-house work.
So your company is actually, so you're personally based in Saudi Arabia, and this is why your distillery and your bedroom are there. Is that right?
Well, yes, that is correct. I do live in Saudi Arabia. I'm a Saudi citizen, and you know, being here, I just figured it's a lot easier to distill here than it would be, for example, in Europe, where Ahmed and Nadim resides, and also being, you know, the oud capital of the world, as some would say, just made sense, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Now that would bring me on to a question that, I mean, you would be in the best position to answer, being a Saudi national, being in Saudi Arabia, where oud is probably, like you just mentioned, milk is probably one of those products that are so everyday. Like milk is
Yes.
in the UK, for example. But of course,
Yes.
a pint of milk is more widely accessible to the average UK citizen than a drop of oud, a drop of pure, high quality oud. What would you say if I said to you that oud is a luxury item for the elite who have the fortune to experience that, and it is, being devil's advocate for a minute, it is inaccessible to most people on the street? What would you say to that?
That is definitely true in some essence. There are many different varieties of oud, as you already know. There's the wild counterpart, as well as the cultivated counterpart. And within each variety, there are also many different smaller varieties, you know. In the cultivated variety, you know, you have the organic, which, you know, I disagree with the term organic, as people, you know, once something is organic means that there has been no human intervention. But in cultivated oud, you know, if it's cultivated, it's human intervention from the spot. So they could hack it with a machete or drill it using the drill bits to trigger the resin forming mechanism within the oud tree. Now, this subset of oud is generally accessible to most people, but the quality and the grade is not what most people are looking for. So they could tamper with it. There are many different methods of tampering, such as, you know, resin injection using high pressure, or just, you know, adding vetiver oil to the mix, or many other perfume oils to the mix. And this is something that's very widespread in Indonesia, where, say, around 1 kilo of it would cost around, you know, give or less $70 or so. And it does smell quite oudi, you know, it smells quite oudi, but in a very harsh and irritating manner. You know, that's what people buy here. It's if you want the top quality milk per se, you know, you need to have well-fed cows and stuff for that. But most of the milk we get are from places where cows are not treated very well, and you know, it's similar to orange juice. Orange juice as well. They actually extract most of what makes orange juice and then dye it orange and put sugar in it, because that's what people yearn for. Yeah. And so the same can be said for oud, you know. And this is something that is not just in oud wood. This also goes across to oud oils. You know, they have isolated specific compounds, you know, certain chromones and sesquiterpenes, which they add in bulk to certain oils, and it just gives off this linear oudi fragrance rather than having the real deal. And they use these in muhallats and atars and sprays, so be it, you know. So it is accessible to anybody who wants it, but if you want the real deal, then that niche suddenly gets a lot smaller. And then if you want the high quality of the real deal, that niche gets even more small. You know, and if you want the artisanal class, or you know, artisanal distillations that have truly artistic and engineering ingenuity behind them, then that niche just dials down to zero, to a very few people.
Yes, I understand. And yes, from a business point of view, we were talking earlier on about the old established brands from the 70s, 80s, like Al-Haramain, Najmal, etc., that have been going for a long time and that have started out with top-end quality stuff. And I guess because of growth and because of demand, they're also become more and more accessible to a wider variety of people. They've branched out to I suppose, include in their assortment oils that are of lower quality, because as you say, the higher the quality, the narrower the people, the narrower your market is. So if you want to expand your market, it is logical that you need to lower the quality so more people can afford it and enjoy it. Is that something that is in the mind of somebody who does oud as a business in the long term?
Yes and no. These mega brands such as Abdul Samad al-Qurashi, Al-Haramain, as you mentioned, Arabian Oud. Personally, I view these as the McDonald's of oud. You know, they're everywhere. They have so many branches, and you know, even if they wanted all their product to be real oud and top quality oud, it would be near impossible. There's simply not enough supply for that demand, and so the same as fast food brands do, they would dumb down their oils, you know, and make it in an accessible manner. Even their higher quality oils are usually dumbed down. And by dumbing down, what I mean is they would say this oil is aged for 50 years, but what that really means is that they took a few grams of 50-year oil and you know, blended it with less superior oils or more inferior oils, and then they'd sell it as, you know, pure oud oil, 50 years aged. Now, while it may be pure oud oil, it's, you know, there's a fine line. It's pure, but it's not what they are marketing it out to be. So even their elite products are still, you know, fast food oud. It's but even within these brands, you must understand, these brands are not doing that because they want to. You know, some people criticize them and saying, oh, they have tarnished oud. These brands are just people who want to make a livelihood, people who want, you know, everybody who builds a brand wishes to get high up there at the end. And these brands as well supply artisanal oud, but to their certain niches. You know, they're not going to post it online for everybody to buy. They have specific customers that they target with these items, specific families, loyal families that have been with them, purchasing from them, you know, for decades. So if, for example, I come and knock the door on them wanting their best product, they're going to tell me, who are you for us to sell it to you? It's not even about money. It's about the prestige at that point. And if I'm not a prestigious person, then to them, why am I worth getting the product if I may not return next year for the next batch, or and so on? You know, people think these houses only sell the adulterated products and so on, but these houses actually have the biggest stockpiles of, you know, high-grade agarwood. Actually, a few years ago, I witnessed personally one of these houses haul in 700 kilograms of wild Sri Lankan agar. And that's not a small number. You know, those are China market numbers. And none of that 700 kilograms was of low quality. That was just their good stock, besides the leftover stock. So you could imagine for those 700 kilograms that they hauled in, which is more than all of us vendors own combined, they also have, you know, 1,200 tons of adulterated wood or perfumed wood and so on. And so they also have kilos of artisanal oil sitting in their shelves. But for those kilos, they have tons of oil that are of inferior quality or adulterated with vetiver or synthetics and so on. So even these big brands play a big role in it. You know, a lot of people think that, oh, they don't know what they're doing, they don't know real oud. But you need to understand that when you go to these brands and you meet the person who is sitting behind the desk, he's not an oud expert, he's a salesman. So we should not ever expect him to know what he's talking about. He's just there to push a product by any means possible. And so that's why I dislike the criticism for these big brands. You know, I often try to defend them because they're doing an entirely different thing. You know, these are people doing it entirely. We don't. If we were to talk bad about them, we have to talk about bad about every industry in existence. You get what I'm saying?
Yes, yes, absolutely. So, Malik, you mentioned China and the emerging market in China, which I believe has sort of slowly developed, but quite significantly developed over the last decade or so. What sort of impact has that had on the way that you run the business, or the way that you can plan your business in terms of demand and supply and the kind of the quality of the products that you need to produce?
It's quite difficult, actually. You know, the Chinese market, they've made it very difficult for us. And it gets even more difficult when we go up in the tier of products that we're trying to source. A lot of times when there's a hunter who gets a fine batch of oud and wants to sell it, you know, that hunter would perform what is called a WhatsApp auction. You know, he would go to his potential buyers and, you know, listen to what prices they might offer. And so I would offer my price, and then this Chinese person would offer 10 times my price and just snatch that batch away. And so a lot of the times you have to build very strong connections with certain people, you know, to get first dibs on that batch. The batch that I have online right now on our website is called Brunei Rattas. Rattas means drowning because the pieces sink in the water. Now that batch was actually a batch that I had to grab before some Chinese businessmen bought it. And it wasn't easy, you know, I kept having to bid higher until I got it. And so a lot of the time doing that just thins out your margins. You know, anybody in this business who says they're not profitable is a liar, you know. Businesses need to be profitable to continue. And so while businesses make profit to stay afloat, sometimes that profit just isn't enough for that full-blown expansion. You know, this batch of Brunei Rattas is very well one of those batches. You know, it's only enough for us to hope for the next batch. And so it's this endless, ruthless cycle of sourcing and attempting to sell and sourcing, attempting to sell. And sometimes your money gets stuck within one batch, and you hope that you could find somebody to wholesale that batch to, which further narrows that margin. So these Chinese buyers, they've made it extremely difficult for small players to even have a share. In the Philippines, which is considered, you know, the last frontier of oud for some, they've completely wiped out certain areas. You know, Tawi-Tawi was just discovered to have oud reserves around 2 years ago. Now that area is bone dry. There is nothing left. Not even, you know, there are trees left, but nothing left of incense grade wood per se. I have tried finding Tawi-Tawi wood for the last year, and the only people who have batches of it won't let go of it. And so they moved on to Mindanao. They moved on to Leyte. They moved on to Davao. And these are people with enormous buying power. Like one person who goes there, he's not actually the businessman. He's just one of the, as you'd call, lackeys of a businessman, or of many businessmen at once. And so this guy gives him $100,000. This guy gives him $500,000. This guy gives him $2 million. And he just goes around and purchases everything he can get his hands on. And because he still has a surplus of money, the hunters go back, cut more trees to supply. And so they just completely wipe out everything. And you come and try to pick up the bits, and we try to sell some respectable quality chips online to our consumers. But it's not easy, to say the least. You know, it's not easy to find the right thing amongst the carnage that is left over behind. You know, you find batches of wood that can cost nothing, and then you have, on the other hand, batches of wood that are quite expensive, but to buy this, you have to buy that with it because they're one lot. And so what are you supposed to do at the end of the day?
But it's interesting. I mean, what you were saying about the stock in Philippines that was discovered so recently and is already wiped out, that sort of leads me on to the whole idea of ethically sourced stuff and sustainability. Are those kind of things, are those values that you rank highly in operating your business? And how do you go about this, given that the tree where the oud comes from is, at the end of the day, a limited resource, and once they're gone, right?
This question of yours, because it allows me to educate many people at the same time when I answer this question.
Okay.
Whilst high quality oud can be considered a finite resource, it is a resource that reproduces itself regularly. What occurred, for example, in Malaysia a couple of centuries ago, the Portuguese had colonized the region, and they themselves were cutting down all the trees there and selling it off. To the Eastern countries like China, to the Arabs through the Silk Road. And so at that time, there were no reserves of high quality oud left in the jungles of Malaysia. But once the Portuguese left the region and a few decades had passed, people were finding King Super grade pieces again in the jungle, and they were finding it in abundance. And so it's not a matter of ethically resourcing. It's more of a matter of, number one, try not to cut the whole tree down. Number two, only focus on getting the high quality stuff. Don't cut a tree just because it has, one tiny ignet of agarwood in it. It's not worth it. I actually myself visited Malaysia numerous times and have seen trees with infected wood without cutting them down, because what's a finger of oud in front of a whole tree? It simply doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
But people there would actually cut that tree down, process the entire thing, get that finger and be like, yay, we got some oud.
Yeah.
And that's what's causing these reserves to end out.
Mm-hmm.
Now in the Philippines, whilst it has finished quite quickly, it's going to come back just as fast. They leave these areas. The people there are not exactly passionate about oud. They just want to make a quick buck. Okay. And so once they give up and the jungles are allowed to recharge, the cycle produces itself once again. People go back, hunt for it, and so on and so on.
Now, Nadim was just giving me a little hint to say that you're happy to show us your distillery. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
That would be very interesting, I
guys,
think, for the viewers to get an idea of what do you get up to in your bedroom.
Okay, so this is my humble abode. This is our copper pots that we use for our distillations, and here is a distillery in full action. It's operating as we speak.
We've got,
and as you can see,
at the moment,
that's some artisanal oud oil. Yeah.
Here we
this
go.
is some oil coming right now using some.
Right.
This is a batch of oil that we've made using some new techniques we've developed. And they're quite ingenious techniques, which I will share once the oil is released. I just don't want to share it and have anybody go and do it and then release an oil before I release mine. You know what I mean?
That makes a lot of sense. But Malik, brother, tell me, why is it? I can see a little bit of. Oh no, that's so. We're looking at a clear liquid, clear fluid there.
Yes, that is correct. The clear fluid is water.
So,
and then
sorry, everything that we've tried here today, and I'm completely ouded out. I think every segment of my hand and every inch of my skin has a different bit of oud oil on it. But they're all dark brown and different shades of brown. Why are we looking at something clear? Just to be asking an ignorant, but perhaps a question that other people might wonder about as well.
Oh, you mean over here?
Yeah.
Over here, this clear part is just water.
That's just
the clear part is simply water.
Okay, so that's.
And the top layer, the top brown layer is the oud.
Right. So I was thinking that I could.
Do you see the top layer?
Dark, swimming right on top. I get you.
Yeah, that's the oud oil that is on top.
So that looks like a
although there have
minute amount.
That's around 3 or 4 grams of oil.
Okay.
I actually have some more oil right over here, which is from the same batch, but using a different distillation technique.
Right.
This is around, I'd say, a tola.
Yeah.
Around 12 grams of oil.
Okay.
And this is using the same material that's in that pot right now, just applying a different distillation method to it.
Okay. Excellent. I bet your bedroom.
And so, these methods that I do are just for. Oh, it does. I have these boxes here filled with oud wood as well for our personal distillations.
Okay. Now, Malik, I'm sorry, I just need to check with Nadim because I'm a bugger at keeping track of time. How long have we got? Yeah, we're doing okay. So can I ask you one more question, Malik, please?
I think we have Yes, of course, go ahead.
So personally, I'm not an expert on oud by any means. I'm not an expert on much anything apart from the work that I do, which is I'm a nurse. But in terms of fragrance, my background is more perfumery rather than oud for reasons of finance and accessibility. And I guess I think most people in the West who are not used to oud from a traditional background in terms of being born into a family where the use of oud is commonplace. We discover oud sort of at the end of the road, or towards the end of the road of going through, the usual high street designer perfumes and perhaps niche perfumes, and you think, oh, the term oud crops up more and more and more, and you look into it, and then you end up in the oud world. So from a sort of a perfumery point of view, how would you compare the art of perfumery, or could you put it on a similar level? The art of perfumery, putting a perfume together, creating something by taking various ingredients, having an idea of what you want to create. Is that the same level as producing, distilling oud? So I guess to put it in another way, how much control do you have of the finished product? Is it possible to have an idea of what you want to create and then in your bedroom come up with exactly that?
Your question has been something that has been debated in the online oud forums for years now. And the debate basically goes, is oud distillation? What I have to say is similar to how an artist understands his brushes and selects which brush to use to paint this color on the canvas and which brush he uses to paint that color on the canvas. Oud distillation can be, expressed in the same manner. Once you have an understanding of how distillation works, there's something called thermodynamic equilibrium, which has something to do with the boiling point in relation to temperature and pressure. Once you understand these basic fundamentals, then you begin to understand how you can really play with that to get the oil out, the essential oil out of the wood at different temperature ranges. For example, let's say you want an oil that is much more top note heavy, then you'd have to invest in a much more efficient condenser, and you might want to also distill at a very low temperature. That will get you much more volatile compounds out. And your condenser will save much more of that vapor and condense it down into liquid. If you want an oil that is much more base heavy, you might want to prolong your distillation to the end and possibly bring down that thermodynamic equilibrium using some sort of vacuum. That way you can cause the distillation to boil over at a much lower temperature. This results in many different facets that you can create in oud, and understanding how to use those facets in correspondence with one another is similar to how a perfume would, create its fragrance. In the distillation that you're seeing right now, I've used many different techniques over many different fractions. For the first fractions of highly volatile compounds, I actually used a very efficient condenser to capture that, separate it at the side, and then also go forth to the second fraction. Now, once I started my second fraction, I said, okay, let me actually allow the same wood to sit down and soak for a bit in the water. So it's one batch of wood, but the second fraction actually has a soak. This produces many different facets and many different parts of down. I can say, okay, I want my resulting oud to be 40% of the third fraction, and 50% of the second fraction, and 10% of the first fraction. Now, I may have wasted a lot of oud oil by not how much of which oud compounds I want to comprise my oud oil. So there's a lot more art involved, and there's a very high learning curve that one needs to grasp when doing these things. And experimentation really brings about results, but as you know, experimentation with something like this is quite expensive, which really limits people and how far they can go. That's what most people are. That's why most people in the oud world are actually afraid of experimenting. You know, you get a nice batch of wood. Do you really want to risk trying something new on it that you may not know if the result is good or not? So I would say yes. It's. I would say yes. It's like perfumery in its art form in terms of creating something new. You can, with enough experience, build an understanding of the resulting oil prior to distilling it just from the raw material.
Yeah, it seems to me that from what you're describing, and like I said to you, I'm not an expert by any means, and I have no idea of the distilling process, what it involves. So having that explained to me is really helpful, because it gives me an idea of how personally you must be involved in creating the end drop that goes into the little bottles. How much of yourself is in that, and the thought that is, you know, the minute details of what you've explained. How long do you leave it to boil? How long do you leave it to ferment? And those kind of things. That's fascinating.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course, you know, it doesn't get more personal than having the distillation in your bedroom.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thanks for the tour. That was revealing. So I smelled earlier from Hashimi kakaya. So kakaya means jackfruit.
Yes.
And I did a little review on it earlier, and
yes.
I was really quite impressed by the fruitiness that it has.
Yes,
but also
it does have this.
It has a depth and a darkness that, with the jackfruit, makes a really unusual combination.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, this is actually quite the perfect example to. Do you remember your previous question when you were asking how the creation of perfume relates to, you know, oud distillation? That fruitiness that you're getting is a combination of primarily two things. You know, it's a co-distillation between Malaysian oud and Cambodia oud.
Yes.
With Malaysian oud, a lot of times you get this resinous cola vibe. You know, it's quite a common note in Malaysians. And then with the Cambodians, you get this fruity element. Now, the fruit in Cambodia oud is not generally a tropical fruit. Rather, it's more of I'd say more of a plummy or a plummy fruit with toffee-like notes and, you know, caramels and things like that. Oftentimes, it can also be spicy, quite red.
Yeah, you know, I was thinking.
When you combine these two together, you know, this cola note. Yeah. When you combine them together, this cola note with this fruity note, it just gives off this resinous, leathery, fruity, tropical vibe. at the end of it. And so this is a perfect example of how, you know, an oud distiller can gauge his final product by 2 batches of wood.
Yes, that is very fascinating. And another one I've tried just now is called Lindaraja Papua 2015.
Yes.
And my impression of that one is that it's really quite gentle compared to the Kakaya.
Yes, that is correct. That one is quite an interesting oil because that oil is extremely top note heavy. You know, just like the zap of these high-pitched top notes, it completely lacks mid notes and bass. You know, it's all you're getting is top notes in this oil, and it's actually a co-distillation of 3 different areas of Kalimantan, Sumatra, and the last one I'm forgetting. It's such an old oil. I think it's a 2015 or 2016 distillation.
Yeah.
You know, it escapes my mind the last region. But these regions combined together distilled at such a low temperature, even actually lower than the boiling point of water. You know, the boiling point of water is 100 degrees. These were distilled at even lower than that, using certain vacuum methods to lower the boiling point. And it just gives this top note heavy oil because only the volatile compounds were captured. None of the heavier semi-volatile compounds were captured in it.
Okay, that's really interesting. I mean, that is really a nice. I mean, having the Papua and the Kakaya together, they're so different, and your explanation makes absolute sense that they're distilled in a different way, and the top notes are much more prominent on the Papua one.
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you, Brother Malik. I think
I appreciate your time, Marcus.
No, I appreciate your time, and thank you for showing us around your abode and your fascinating distillery. When I get home, I'm going to grab a copper pot from the kitchen and I'll start my own, if that's okay with you.
I would love to see that. You can get in contact with me and I can help out.
Thank you, brother. Thank you for your time.
I appreciate it.
Assalamu alaikum, my brother.
Thank you, Brother Marcus. Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.